Good morning, this is Mr. Mike from the Mechanicsburg Learning Center with another edition of Mr. Mike's Dino-A-Day. This is episode 41, and today we're going to go over not an animal, but another person, a very important person in the history of fossil discoveries. This person's name is Mary Anning. Mary Anning was a young girl, lived in the very early part of the 1800s. She was born 1799, died in 1847. Mary Anning is an extremely important person in paleontological history with basically no scientific training. She made stunning discoveries, helped men of science immensely, and is largely forgotten about today. But in her day, she was extremely famous worldwide by lots of famous historical paleontological figures. So in front of me is something called an ammonite. Ammonites, at one point, folks didn't know what these things were. And they're called nautiluses, all sorts of different things. Let me change the light a little bit, see if I can get a little bit better. How's that look? Is that better? Turn this off. Turn this up. Yeah, the nautilus is very interesting. The ammonite, they believed that when they were discovered originally, that these things were curled up snakes that the gods had turned into snakes. Humans had been turned into these things and then been fossilized. So they didn't know what they were. And now, of course, we do know that some sort of squid-like animal lived in here. So ammonites were some of the things that this Mary Anning had discovered. Let's give you a look at Mary. Okay, Mary Anning would go fossil hunting along with her dog Trey. They would scour the beaches, the cliffs along the English Channel, and she loved to go fossil hunting right after a big storm because things were exposed, things would erode away, and she would find some amazing fossils. And her ability to discover fossils was very interesting, so interesting that, as I said, men of science basically beat a path to her door because they wanted her to help them find some interesting fossils also. So even as a young child, this began quite early. Her father died when she was only 11 years old. And as a result, she had to help the family figure out a way to survive monetarily. So she went to the beach, collected these fossils, and set up a little table and would sell them. There's a famous poem that has the line, "She sells seashells by the seashore," which they actually believe was inspired by Mary Anning. So Mary lived, as I said, 1799, 1847. Father died when she was 11 years old. And very early on, her brother, get the light back on here for a second. Very early on, her brother discovered fossiled skull of some strange animal. And she was very interested in it, so she asked him, "Where can I find such a thing?" And he gave her some direction. She went and she ended up excavating the entire skeleton of this animal, and it turned out to be a ichthyosaur, an ancient fish. That was in 1811, so she was only 11, 12 years old. Something happened to Mary when she was very young that kind of set her up for kind of what we would call a charmed life. It wasn't an easy life. She was very poor, grew up that way. Only in later life did she have any modicum of success in terms of science. But as I said, there was very little schooling. She was self-taught. But when she was 15 months old, she was taken by her mother and some ladies to an equestrian show. And they were all standing under a tree watching a show. Storm breaks out, lightning strikes the tree, killing all three women. And luckily one of the women at that point was not her mother, but three women were killed. And Mary, as a 15-month-old baby, they found her. She was unconscious. They took her back to the house and kind of brought her around in a warm bath, and she survived, obviously. And the doctor said it was miraculous. And up until that point, Mary had been kind of a sickly child, and they said things kind of changed after that. I don't know if it gave her a new zeal for life, but since that time, she was very curious, very intelligent, and even though she had lacked schooling, she was incredibly smart. So that definitely changed her life, had an effect. So 1811, the ichthyosaur is discovered. Then she pulls in 1823 the first complete plesiosaurus out of the ground. Plesiosaurus is this one. Okay, long neck and a turtle-shaped body, long neck. This was the famous animal that Edward Drinker Cope made a big boo-boo. When he was putting the skeleton back together, he actually took the head and put it on the tail because he thought that that part was the neck. So Mary Anning, the first complete plesiosaurus skeleton. She also discovered this animal. This is Dimorphodon, discovered by Mary Anning. Unfortunately, Mary didn't often get the credit for her discoveries. Just the fact that the Geological Society of London at the time, they could not admit women. And if there was ever a woman that deserved to be part of this, it was Mary Anning. But she was a woman, and the society did not allow women to be part of it. 1833. Now, Mary is about 34 years old, going on another fossil hunt, and there is a landslide, which nearly cost her her life. Sadly, it did take the life of her dog, Trey. It was buried, and she escaped again, a very dangerous situation to go on and continue to collect through the rest of her life. Some of the famous paleontologists, some of the famous anatomists, some of the famous scientists of her day all knew about Mary. William Buckland, who was very instrumental in early paleontological discoveries. Richard Owen. Richard Owen and Buckland actually visited Mary. She had opened up her own shop. That was 1826. She opened a shop called Anning's Fossil Depot, where she sold vertebra, she sold ammonites, she sold teeth, anything that she recovered from her fossil hunts. And interestingly, in 1865, now this is years after her death, a very famous writer by the name of Charles Dickens wrote an article about Mary. So although today not many people know the name of Mary Anning, she was very well known in her day, but she certainly deserves to be mentioned with all the great scientists in terms of dinosaur discoveries and ancient animal discoveries. So we decided to give Mary her due by writing a special poem all about Mary and her fossil hunting exploits that is contained in Dino-A-Day Poetry, Volume 3. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for sharing these on Facebook. Thanks for watching the YouTube channel, Mr. Mike Sgrignoli. And we are posting all of our videos there. And as I said, this is Mr. Mike's Dino-A-Day, episode 41, brought to you by the Mechanicsburg Learning Center. The story of Mary Anning. The history of dino finds is filled with famous men, and all details are shared in terms of who found what and when. So when new species are announced, producing instant fame, quite often, the once unknown man becomes a household name. But there once lived a woman that would come to redefine how best to go locate a bone and then solve the beast's design. Her name was Mary Anning, and she had this special gift, and though she had ability and sense, it caused a rift. You see, back in the 1800s, no girl could attain an open door to science which was clearly man's domain. So even though she was the one to find and prep a bone, she's not exactly prominent, she's practically unknown. When she was just 12 years of age, her brother found a skull, so she then sought and found the rest of this strange animal. She dug it out and lined it up, and soon she felt quite sure that what lay right beside her was one marvelous ichthyosaur. Here's Mary and her dog, Trey. Now, this ichthyosaur. It was a fish, but not the kind she'd ever come across. It had huge eyes, a croc-like head. This fish was clearly boss. Turns out this was a specimen, the best example found, and Mary soon became the most important girl in town. Only 11 years old. Her talent led great men of science right up to her door. They all came seeking her advice on which spots to explore, and she was glad to offer any help that would assist, for though she lacked the schooling, she was quite the scientist. Discoveries kept piling up. Dimorphodon and more. She dug up ammonites and sold her seashells by the shore. She found some stones she felt were kind of different. Here's the scoop. She helped decide it's coprolite. That's right, it's dino poop. Her breakthrough finds so critical put science in a bind. They can't admit a woman, but in time they change their mind. So little Mary Anning, from some fallen rock and stone, proceeded to become the greatest fossil hunter known. Mary Anning, arguably one of the world's greatest fossil hunters. And there's her dog, Trey. Thanks again so much for tuning in every day. We do this every day, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on Facebook, and they are posted at Mr. Mike Sgrignoli YouTube page. So until tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, this is Mr. Mike from the Mechanicsburg Learning Center saying have a great day, do some fossil hunting on your own, and you might become as famous as Mary Anning.